Hey, welcome to Best in Fest. I'm Leslie Lepage, the director of the La Femme International Film Festival, and this is a podcast for all the people who are interested in advancing their career in television, film, and learning all these dirty little secrets that Hollywood wants to keep away from you. So today my guest is Nina Ameri, and she is awesome. She is an attorney and is the founder of Ameri Law, a lovely and really boutique entertainment and intellectual property law firm. She handles production legal on new media, films, television projects, you name it, she's done it. She's also counsel to individual producers, writers, and directors, negotiating and drafting their talent agreements, as well as really handling development, production, and distribution of independent films and handling the contractual aspects of that. She specializes in intellectual property, life story rights, entity selection, entity formation. For all those that don't know what that means corporation formation, talent agreements, investor agreements, and shopping agreements. So we got a lot to talk about. Welcome, Nina.
Hi, that sounds so overwhelming.
It's like, what doesn't she do?
Well, it's all, you know what, it's all tied to the same thing, which is this crazy business called Hollywood. You know, it's funny because people, you know, they think it's all fun and games, but really this is a business. And, you know, the people that ultimately succeed in it handle it that way from the outset.
Since you have like a wide, purview of really what's going on contractually, from the standpoint of protecting your talent, let's start with something simple, which has a lot of confusion on it. What is a shopping agreement? A lot of independents don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, I do them almost every single day. So I'll start by saying it's the most common agreement in the development phase of a project. Mm-hmm. It essentially gives a producer the ability to shop around a concept, a screenplay, a pilot, some kind of IP, or sometimes it's even more of in the idea stage. So there could just be like a rough outline treatment for a set period of time. It generally is either exclusive or non-exclusive. More often than not, it's exclusive because nobody wants to have, somebody say, hey, wait a minute, this other producer's shopping this same project. So generally we're talking about 12 months. You have the right to shop it around town to get it set up. That's what it is.
Are there certain things that you try and protect or build into that contract, such as at the end of the 12 months, hey, if we're able to get that third party interested in it, we're going to pay you this much amount of money? Do you go into that detail to protect your client, or do you let that negotiate at that point?
Well, there's a couple of things that I think are important in shopping agreements. One of them is it needs to have just kind of a general understanding of what are we working towards. And, say, okay, I'm the producer, I'm working towards, being attached, as either a showrunner or, one of the EPs. You're working towards, being in the writer's room. So while nobody can make, promises, because ultimately the buyer is going to decide certain things, we can at least say that, hey, neither one of us are going to move forward if we're not both attached in some role. The specifics of those deals we'll negotiate directly. One of the other important things is, oftentimes, you'll have a short term, 12 months, and then, you've pitched it to a bunch of different buyers, and then that owner of the IP, let's say 2 or 3 years down the road, that same buyer is interested. Well, if my client's a producer and he introduced you, then at that point, he should be, brought back into the deal. So, again, it's almost, it works like as a non-circumvention agreement. We're not going to run around town and help you get all these meetings. And then 2 years later, because of our relationship, you went and set it up. We're still going to be attached. So those are kind of the two, I think, biggies that a lot of people say, oh, it's just a simple shopping agreement. It is, but it needs to have some general understanding of what the deal should look like and what the relationship is.
I think a lot of confusion with independence though is even though you have a shopping agreement, right? The network is God. So the network, let's say the network says, I really like this TV show, but your EP has no credits, that isn't a showrunner, can't pull it off. We don't feel comfortable, or they're not part of our little like approved list that they never talk about that's approved. We want to get them off, or we don't want them. Then what happens? How do you protect your two?
Well, the shopping agreement will say, nobody can move forward without the other. Now, in theory, what'll usually happen is, the parties hopefully have a cordial relationship. They're talking, and if my client is the one is the EP that's not really the level they want, if I think if they're reasonable, they'll say, okay, at least give me, this credit. I want this episodic fee. Maybe I'm not the showrunner, but I have some kind of creative role. So I think that that's what's important is, be reasonable. There is a place for you, but you have to be reasonable.
And have you seen in your experience that reasonableness winning, meaning you come back to the network and say, okay, we understand he doesn't have the credibility that you're looking for, but we're willing to do it for this, this, and this. Do you see that the network is willing to play ball with you?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Because, they don't want, ultimately, we can kill the deal too, right? Because the shopping agreement will say no party can move forward without the other party. So we can pull a string and say, no, we don't want to do this because they're trying to push us out. So yes, they will work with us. It's one of those things where you have to understand that credits are building blocks. Okay, so you just have to be aware of where you are in your career, and everybody needs a starting point. It's better to have some kind of producer credit than just not have a deal.
Which is really good for, I think, those filmmakers that are listening into the podcast, that they understand that. Because I think, some are unrealistic going, well, I'm going to be EP and it's not going to go without me. And then you just look at them going, that's just not realistic. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. I don't really take on people that are not reasonable. I'm going to be 100% honest. I have a very simple rule, which is if I wouldn't go out to breakfast, lunch, dinner, or drinks with you, either you won't be my client or you won't be somebody that I do business with. It works though, because if you don't pass that very simple test, we're not moving forward.
That's an awesome test. That I should take that test on for some of the people I've brought on.
Exactly. I mean, honestly, people, if they're difficult, I mean, at this point in my career, I know the first phone call if someone's going to be difficult, and it's just, I'm interested in having long-term clients and relationship, and that is what I have. So you got to run sometimes.
You gotta run.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're dealing with now the talent, right, your client, and let's say they've got a script or a screenplay or a TV show or whatever that you're selling, and now you're working with the studios or production entities to sell that through this talent agreement. What are some of the big, like, things that you always make sure that they have in there, or things to look out for when you're receiving that contract from the studios for them?
Well, I think let's actually look at something that comes up a lot, which is where they may have collaborated with someone, or they may have had somebody doing notes or something like that. So one of the first things that I tell people is, how did this IP come about? Is there anybody who needs to grant rights to us? Because the last thing you want to do is be that close to getting a contract. Get the contract. It has reps and warranties that you own the work outright, that there's no encumbrances or liens or any copyright claims. And meanwhile, oh, well, when I first started this, I had this writing partner, and well, she only wrote this one character, and then it did, but you don't have a written agreement. And so absent that, the copyright law says that that's a joint work. So that's the big problem that I see. Before you get your project out there and you're shopping it, make sure that if you collaborated with anyone, you own all rights. You've done whatever you need to do to quit claim them, whatever it is. That's a big one.
Yeah, what other landmines do you see regarding that IP when you're getting those deals?
That particular one I see literally every week, sadly. I see that one literally every week. And then, what ends up happening is sometimes we have to go back and get those rights. Meanwhile, the studio is like, what's going on? Why is this, why are you dragging your feet? Or, you know, sometimes we just have to kind of come clean and tell them, and we're taking care of it. So it's just makes you look unprofessional. It makes you look like you're an amateur. You don't know what you're doing. And this mainly, happens when someone doesn't have a lawyer. They're just starting out. They start collaborating with people, and a lot of it is just friends, writing and being creative and not really thinking about, okay, what's going to happen with this.
Well, let's talk about friends that are no longer friends, that started off as writing partners that do have a contract. So let's say they were great friends, they had a contract, they shared rights on this, and then they couldn't agree, right? But they each have ownership to that IP. And let's say one of them rewrites it, takes it off, spins it in a different direction, and then sells it because they've rewritten it, they fixed it, they've improved it, they spun it off in a different direction, even though it originally started from a collaborative contracted work that with somebody that they decided was crazy. How does one clean that up? Is that even an issue if they've...
It's a big issue because, you can't make a derivative work, without at least having your partner be financially compensated. So maybe you can go and create other works, but you have to credit them and you have to pay them. So usually in a scenario like that, we would go back to the partner and say, listen, we took it, we went this direction with it, we've got some interest in it. Let's figure out how we're going to split the pie now. So most of the time, if people smell money in an opportunity, they're going to come to the table, because without that, they have nothing. They have no credit and they have no money. And it's hard to get projects sold. So we've been very successful with just going back and cleaning up after the fact and figuring out, a fair split and make sure that old partner got credited.
Right, even though it may not be a 50-50 split because the work that they've done is no...
Right, that's all negotiated.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So it's tangible to clean this up after you...
I mean, so many deals get cleaned up after the fact. It's very common.
Okay, good. Well, that's good to know for those that are listening in. When you are securing, let's say, an investor, right? One of the most important things is to really protect the investor's money, but also to protect you. So how do you go about putting in, more common aspects to protect the IP, to protect the talent when dealing with an investor who is now financially, let's say, funding it?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing when you're dealing with investors is not making any statements that are going to mislead them about the project, their recoupment. I think that a lot of business plans that I see, people are a bit overly confident in how a film is going to do, and what you would really should be spending time is making sure that they're aware of the risks, because as we all know, this is a extremely risky business. So it's not so much when I'm dealing with an investor, am I worried about, talent or other things. I'm primarily worried that, are we going to be doing a PPM, laying out all the risks? And we could do a whole show just on this topic because it's very, it has to be done.
Maybe we should.
Yeah, it has to be done. The most important thing is it has to be done the right way. The documents have to be done the right way. It may need to be, depending on who your investor is and how they came on board, we may need to file documents with the SEC and with individual states. They're called blue sky laws. So it's not as simple as just throwing together a business plan and, here you go. There's a lot that goes into it, and it's fairly complicated.
Okay. Define, for those that listening, in a PPM. So define what that is.
It's a private placement memorandum, and it's basically a document, when you're going out to private investors. So this is private equity. It basically lays out what is the investment, who are the managers of the LLC, how are you going to recoup your money, what are the risks involved. It's kind of the roadmap for everything that you need to know about this film so that you can make an informed decision as to whether or not you want to invest.
And that is hugely confusing because you're right. A lot of the independents go, well, I've created this business plan and I've told them, and so that's really all I need to do. And here, sign the contract and give us your money. When they don't really realize that they have to qualify the investor sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, you always have to.
And to make sure that they're able to give you that money if it's not coming from a family.
They're an accredited investor. Yeah, the terminology is accredited investor. And generally it's somebody who has gross annual income more than $300,000 a year, net worth of more than $1 million.
Yeah, so they've got to make sure that those are in place.
So these are people that can presumably afford to lose all their money.
Right, without getting hurt.
We don't want teachers putting their pensions on the line.
Right.
Let's just say that.
Right. Now, in your firm, sometimes you help your clients secure investors. Is that true? More kind of on the packaging end?
I mean, what I do, and I do this a lot, is, they come to me to figure out how are they going to structure the LLC, what different types of levels of investment that are going to come in. I generally am the one that's talking to the investor's lawyer, answering all of the questions about, the operating agreement and the PPM. I wouldn't say that I'm the one finding the investors. That's really a producer's job, and that is their most important job. It's kind of, the make it or break it of are you going to be a successful producer? Do you know how to raise money? That's the question of the hour. So when they come to me, they generally already have the investor.
Something else that's kind of interesting is now, let's say they successfully got it funded. They have now produced it, and now they're looking at distribution. They've gone through the festival circuit. They are now going to the markets, AFM, Berlin, Cannes, whatever, and they are presented with a distribution contract. What are kind of the negotiating tips, things that you look out for when you're dealing with that distribution contract?
Well, first and foremost, is there a minimum guarantee? At the end of the day, we all want to make sure that we try to, recoup the investors' investment as quickly as possible. We want to take a look at, what are the distribution expenses? What are the marketing expenses? Are they capped? Are we giving them rights to, North America? Is it a, international deal? If it's an international deal, are we carving out certain countries? I've had clients that have had very specific, markets either in Asia or Europe or elsewhere where, by retaining that territory, they could actually do a separate deal and do quite well. So, I have a film that just shot in Russia, and the plan for that one is to retain and sell the Russian territory first because they somehow managed to, according to the client, get the Brad Pitt of Russia. Now, I don't know if he really is or not, but this is their strategy. In other words, they're not going to go and give away all the rights. They're going to try to sell Russia first because they think that's a pretty big paycheck.
Who is the Brad Pitt of
Russia? His name is very hard and I don't remember it. But I think that, I looked him up and he seemed like he was a real movie star. So
when negotiating the percentages, from year to year, film to film, distribution companies, that fluctuates, right, on what their first numbers are. In the independent world, it always is, kind of less lucrative for the point of the independent than it is if you're dealing with a studio. So what are the numbers that you've seen, pre-COVID, post-COVID, if there's a difference in those percentages?
I wouldn't say that there's a difference in the percentages, and I'm not a person that's focusing on, you know, this was the number here. Every film is unique. Okay, it's just like any other product. The market is going to dictate a lot of these things. And I don't necessarily think it's a pre-COVID, post-COVID. It's more like this genre, this territory, this is what we're willing. Who is your talent? That's ultimately what's going to determine how much they're willing to give as a minimum guarantee, if anything, because those are becoming more and more rare. And then number two, it's going to also determine their flexibility on percentages and capping. But more often than not, they're not, they like to stick to their formulas. Let's just say that.
For those that are listening in, they may not know what a minimum guarantee is. You want to explain that?
It's basically a sum of money that the company will pay you upon execution of the agreement. So the minimum guarantee is $50,000, and you know that no matter what happens with the film after, you know that you've got that $50,000.
And sometimes that could be based off of projected sales, and sometimes it may just be an upfront fee that they're giving you to secure that film because they know they can sell it in different territories, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's an important thing that I think a lot of filmmakers don't quite understand, that could be an option for the film depending on who you have in the film, like starring in it, if it's desirable, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is the number one thing I tell people. Cast, talent. That's what sells movies. Well, I want to make a $200,000 film. I'm like, can you just maybe try to get more money and get a bigger name? Because it's very challenging, to sell these ultra low budget films, because it's rare to how many, Little Miss Sunshines are there? And that was actually a big film. That is not even a good example. Blair Witch Project. That's a good example. How many of those are there? Not a lot.
Or Open Water. Again, not a lot, with these no-name actors that hit skyrocketing numbers. And I think that's something valid to speak about is a lot of the independents want to make that film, and if they just spend a little bit more time on the fundraising campaign, they could get a little bit more money and secure a name that would actually guarantee them interest from a distribution company.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I'm obviously a lawyer, I'm not a producer, but if I was to get into this business, that is where I would spend my time. Is I got to find somebody that is marketable, that I know can sell in this territory, in this genre, because these were the numbers on that. I mean, there's a science to this. There's analytics to this. It's not, just throwing something. It's not all about art. You have to, at the end of the day, make sure that you have a product that the market wants.
Entity selection, entity formation, and securing life rights. In fact, let's do life rights first. Now, a lot of the wave right now is basing things off of IPs, basing this off of life rights. So let's say a filmmaker finds someone they want to do life rights on. How do they go about? What are they looking for? What are they going to offer? And how are you setting up that contract?
Well, here it is. At the end of the day, you want life rights because you don't want to get sued, right? There's a lot of information, depending on the notoriety of the person, there's often a lot of information that's, in the public domain and from news that's, generally known, not private facts. So, the first question is, what kind of film are you making? Is this a biopic that's favorable to the person? Is it controversial? There's lots of different, stories that you can tell. So that's kind of the starting point. The second question is, how much of what we need to show on screen is private and not available to us, again, from the public domain and other sources. So once we kind of ask ourselves those questions, then we know, okay, we're going to approach them. Now, generally speaking, people want to do business with people that they like. So you have to build a rapport. A lot of these life rights deals that I do, they come about as a result of somebody having a relationship, whether it was some kind of childhood connection or friend from work or something like that. There's a kind of a foundational relationship to that. And if, in some cases, people are giving life rights for nothing, all because they trust the person. So trust is really a lot of times the biggest factor in whether you're going to be able to get life rights or not. It's not always about, what kind of check can you write. I've done tons of deals where we didn't pay anything for life rights. All of it was going to be deferred once the project got set up.
Right, and sometimes that it's not only beneficial for the person that's having it about, or the story that's being told about them, especially if it's favorable, but it also helps the filmmaker get that story out there. Is there a difference between securing life rights for a film as opposed to a documentary?
Well, in the documentary, you're going to basically have to do two things. So you're going to have to get both life rights, and you're going to want an appearance release, because the person's likeness is going to be featured in the actual film. Whereas if it's a scripted project, they're not going to be in it. We're going to have actors portray them. So, the other thing too with documentaries is you usually end up, as you're talking to them, they'll tell you about some other person, and then you kind of want to explore more. So you may end up getting life rights or appearance releases from lots of people in kind of the web of information that you acquire from the life rights holder. So I tell people to just be very kind of methodical about everyone who's, could really be helpful to the story, and try to secure the releases and whatnot at the very beginning. Don't wait, because trust me, people all of a sudden when they smell money, first they were going to give it to you for free. Now all of a sudden they want something.
I get a question asked all the time from documentarians, which is, do I need to secure licensing rights if I'm using something from news broadcast?
It depends on if it falls under fair use or not. So fair use is a doctrine that basically says that if something is transformative, if it's significantly different than how it originally appeared, and if it's necessary to tell a story, then there's an exception called fair use that allows you to use that without paying a license fee. And it's primarily used in connection with something that is, educational in purpose or newsworthy. And so, we rely on that doctrine a lot with documentary films.
When would you have to secure the licensing rights? When it's not falling into the story structure of advancing that because you have to utilize this in order to explain the story?
Yeah, I mean, you generally will have already had an idea of what that license fee looks like, who is the rights holder. That's kind of one of the things, like, you got to be organized. You're pulling fish from here, where did it come from? We've had films where we had to do a lot of cleanup. We didn't even know where something came from. So most documentary filmmakers will have backups in case they can't get licensing, or they can't rely on fair use.
Do you suggest, or do you recommend, that if you're shooting in California, you're forming a corporation in California, or can they, if they're not shooting in California, form a corporation in a state that doesn't have the state franchise annual fees?
Yeah, I mean, generally you are going to form where the majority of the film is either shot or edited. We always take a look at, those tax benefits, and a lot of people, want to avoid California, but sometimes you just can't. You're doing everything from here. Guess what? You got to form your entity here. The 99% of independent films, the holding company is an LLC, not a corporation. And that's because an LLC is the most easiest structure in terms of, flexibility with different classes of members. You can have foreign investors. The majority of independent films are going to be LLCs. And like I said, we'll always take a look at, if you're shooting somewhere where there's tax benefits, what does that look like? That's really kind of one of the first things a producer does. So by the time they get to me, they already have figured out, we're going with, New Mexico because of this. You have to do it in California because it's actually more expensive to shoot it here because we would have to fly out all the talent. There's lots of different conversations that happen.
Right. Good to know. So, couple last questions. What's your advice to young filmmakers?
I think my advice to them is, as much as you spend time, focusing on your craft, taking writing classes, read read books about the entertainment business, read books about entertainment law, really educate yourself about all this, because at the end of the day, you're in charge of your career. You're going to have reps, you're going to have a lawyer, you're going to have all these people, but you are a business. And so you want to know every aspect of that, not just the creative part. Don't delegate all of that responsibility. You need to take some ownership in your learning. And guess what? It'll help you and it'll save you money, because when you do end up calling me, you're going to have kind of some base knowledge, and it's going to speed up the process.
Excellent. And what's a dirty little secret of Hollywood that you wish somebody had told you and you go, I know this now?
Well, I don't know if it's a dirty secret. I think everybody knows it, but guess what? Everybody knows each other. This is a very small business. It's a very, very small business. So be careful what you say and who you say it about, because let me just tell you, everyone talks to each other.
And it may just come back to bite you.
It will come back to you. It certainly will. Yeah, people will know your reputation. You do good work, people will know that. You screw somebody over, they'll know that too.
Good to know. Thank you so much. I want to say you've been listening to Best in Fest and our wonderful guest, Nina Ameri, and she is an amazing attorney. Do you want to shout out some of your socials to them and your website?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Nina Ameri Esquire. My Instagram handle is Nina and Ameri ESQ. I love being a guest speaker. So anybody who's interested in having me do a panel, I'm always up for it.
Excellent. I want to say thank you so much, and thank you for joining us and listening to Best in Fest, La Femme International Film Festival. If you're interested in attending this year, our tickets are on sale now. Go to lafemme.org and purchase the early bird or the VIP pass and come and join us virtually or on the ground. The podcast will be posted on La Femme International Film Festival, La Femme Film Festival YouTube channel, so you can see the video component there. Watch us, listen to us, and rate us on iTunes. And I want to say thank you, Nina, so much. You've been listening to Best in Fest.